The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome to the Department of Special Needs Ministries webinar, A Place to Call Home, Meeting the Housing Needs of Adults Living with Developmental Disabilities. My name is Rachel Chung, Disabilities Coordinator for the Archdiocese of Washington, Department of Special Needs Ministry. For today's webinar, we will explore what type of housing option for adults living with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Later in the webinar, I will welcome Tom Welsh, who will share his experience as founder of Rosaria Communities, Incorporated. Rosaria Communities is an independent nonprofit working towards providing housing for adults living with intellectual and developmental disabilities in partnership with Catholic parishes, Montgomery County Housing and Urban Development Offices, and Jubilee Association, a provider of direct services. We as church can play a role as well. Are we welcoming people living with intellectual and developmental disabilities into the life of the parish, the social events of the parish, religious education or adult formation classes? This all plays a role in creating a community, supporting one another, and building connections. How do we move from building a house towards creating a home? We all have a desire to have a place called home. What does home mean? There are many different viewpoints. Home can be a place where you grew up. Home can also be a place where you raised your family and saw them grow up. We always have connections and we think about home to memories and holidays and the neighborhood and those that were with us in the neighborhood. Home can be an apartment, townhouse, single-family home. In many ways, the size and location is not as important as the people inside. That's what makes the house a home. So it's important for us to think as well, what does home mean to you? In the past, people living with developmental and intellectual disabilities and their families had very limited options. Even in our more recent history, families were told to place their child in an institution and just not to worry about them anymore. Thankfully, this attitude changed over time, although perhaps too slowly, and we could easily see that this type of setting excluded and segregated people from their communities. Later, group homes were developed, and depending on the size of the home, there could be up to 10 people living in one place. And families chose and still choose today to continue to care for their loved one in their family home. So what are some of the current approaches that are being done to provide housing options to adults living with developmental and intellectual disabilities? People now have homes in the community, typically up to 3 people, and the support is really based on those individuals living there. There is a movement to separate housing from services. So in the past, providers of services would typically own the homes that they were having the people live. But now there's a movement to separate that so that the housing belongs to the individuals, not necessarily the agency. One of the very important key current approaches is that people have choice in who lives with them and where they live. And today, depending on how the person needs supports, there's people that rent their own apartment or perhaps even own a home, and they might be living with 1 or 2 roommates. So we can see that there's been a shift from moving from institutional type of care to people living in neighborhoods, being your neighbor. So what are the needs now and into the future? Approximately 25% of people living with intellectual and developmental disabilities access paid supports from a DD or developmental disabilities service system. So this is a general statistic across the United States. So 25% we can see is a very low number of people even accessing any type of service. In the state of Maryland, over 5,000 people are on the waiting list for services. So we can see that the need for these types of supports greatly outweighs what we're able to provide. So what does it mean for the future needs? So we can probably easily guess that government systems cannot meet all the needs of people living with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Alone, we could see 5,000 people on the waiting list is a very high number. So how can we meet these needs? And we could see from our own experiences that adults living with intellectual and developmental disabilities are living longer and healthier lives, and they want to be integrated and part of their community. Maryland is adopting this policy of a community of practice. So what does this mean? Along with other states, including the District of Columbia, the Developmental Disabilities Administration of Maryland is looking towards moving beyond eligibility specific supports only, and only seeing that as part of a whole integrated level of support for the person. So eligibility specific supports will include traditional DDA funded supports. So instead of looking at services only, the state of Maryland, along with other states, again, is looking at the whole entire person throughout their lifespan. And what does that mean to have a good life? So that will be part of having eligibility specific supports, but it will also be developing relationships, looking at technology and other community resources. A link to these resources is on the handout included in this webinar. So we will now bring in Tom Welsh, who is the founder of Rosaria Communities. We will explore with Tom one way Rosaria Communities, along with Catholic parishes and other community partners, have responded to the growing need of housing for adults living with developmental disabilities, and creating, again, more than just a home, more than just a house, but a home. So welcome, Tom.
Rachel, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you very well. Thank you, Tom, again for joining us. We really appreciate you taking the time out.
Sure, it's my pleasure.
So, Tom, yes, can you please introduce yourself?
Sure. In addition to what you just said, I am Tom Welsh and president of Rosaria Communities. My professional career is in the insurance industry. I'm CEO of a subsidiary of a major U.S. corporation, but most importantly, I'm a parent of 5 children, and 2 of whom have special needs, which prompted my interest in this particular issue. Shall I tell you a little bit about Rosaria?
Yes, please. Please tell us a little bit more about Rosaria Communities and the mission.
Sure. Well, the mission of Rosaria Communities is to develop housing opportunities for people with special needs. And it has a special emphasis. The big differentiator between Rosaria and other entities that are providing housing opportunities is that in addition to assuring that the housing and nutritional and hygienic needs of the residents are being attended to, we felt that it was equally important to attend to their spiritual needs and to make sure that they were being addressed. So our approach, stepping back and looking at the community was in a subsidiarity type of a principle, was to look at Catholic parishes and to note that Catholic parishes are generally situated in neighborhoods, which encourages a neighborly and an approximate approach to helping to provide the care, to assure the spiritual well-being of the residents. So Rosaria Communities works with the housing agencies, which most of the entities that provide housing do, but we also partner with a local parish and have that and convince that parish. It isn't hard to convince the parish, but to introduce the parish to the Rosaria community and to encourage the parish to set up a ministry that supports the house. So that when we get most of our projects so far have been single family homes. The state of Maryland limits the number of residents to 3 to avoid an institutional setting. So our houses typically would have 3 residents and a residential care provider. And so our partnership with the parish community is to support those residents and the residential care provider and the supplemental staff that provide the housing, feeding, and hygiene, but also to assure that the residents are able to address their spiritual interests. If it means going to Mass on Sunday, then they help them to get there, or they greet them when they get there. If they're not Catholic, if they're a different faith, then we help to assure that that they get to wherever they want to go, if it's Saturday or Sunday services. So that's, again, I just want to emphasize that attending to our residents' spiritual needs is the significant differentiator between Rosaria and other entities that are doing a similar type of operation.
And Tom, why do these partnerships? You kind of spoke a little bit about that, but what do you think are the benefits of partnering? For example, I know Rosaria Communities is also partnered on the county level as well, to kind of get these different homes maybe renovated or even built from scratch.
Well, right, the housing agencies in most metropolitan areas recognize that they have a population of individuals with special needs. And they recognize that those individuals have a need for housing. And that need tends to eventuate as the care providers, whether it's parents or guardians of those individuals, age out of their ability to take care of them, or who want to be proactive before they lose that ability and help the person that they're responsible for live as independently as possible. So the most of the housing agencies tend to be local, and they are trying to address this need. So they're open to partnerships such as Rosaria to bring solutions to the table. And as you mentioned, Rachel, there's an impetus at the state level, and it's being encouraged from the federal level to separate, to deinstitutionalize, to get out of the business of institutionalizing care for folks with special needs, and to help them to live as independently as possible. And our solution is a solution for people with special needs who require who aren't able to live totally independently, who do require some level of residential care. By being an owner of these properties and arranging the partnerships for the care provider and with the parishes, so community involvement, we're right in the wheelhouse of the way that housing agencies, local housing agencies, are trending to address this problem.
Yeah, exactly. Because we've seen that the movement is definitely to full community inclusion, right, Tom? Just as you mentioned,
Exactly.
not just
Right.
living in a home, but being part of a community.
Well, that's what I like to say, that we help them to not be institutionalized in the community.
Exactly.
Or among the community.
Well said.
Right.
Good. Well, we know there's a lot of benefits, but what would you say are some of the challenges with creating these partnerships and these different ways of working with parishes?
The biggest challenge is always money. It's, you know, so a typical Rosaria project will cost in the Washington D.C. area and in Montgomery County, which is expensive housing. It'll cost in the area of $500,000 to acquire a house, and another couple $100,000 to renovate it for the purpose of for its intended purpose. So $700,000, $800,000, and of course it has to be furnished as well. So money is always the problem, and we've got 4 projects so far. We've got 4 houses so far, and each of the financing for each of them has come together in a little bit different way. Sometimes it's been a family who has more resources than others, who have a child with special needs, who put up half the money for the project. And our deal with our particular situation is that if we can find half the capital, that the housing agency will find the other half for us from a variety of funding sources that they have. So money is always the biggest challenge. And then bureaucracy is also a challenge. Finding your way through the housing, the different requirements for housing in depending on what your locale is, can be a challenge. So the partnerships with the county agencies and the repetition of those partnerships helps to kind of grease the skids, for lack of a better phrase, to make a project go forward. And in addition, it helps you to eliminate cost. For example, it's very easy for us to get an exclusion for real estate taxes if the state knows that we're involved with a project that's supported by the county. So I'd say money and bureaucracy are the 2 biggest challenges.
Definitely. As I think many of the families supported also experience in other ways too, right? That's kind of seems to be a barrier as well to creating these homes. So I know one example though of St. Rose of Lima and Gaithersburg. And I know that I'm glad you mentioned that each home had a unique story.
Right.
It wasn't all just the same story for each home. And this particular home happened to be a new construction, right? And that
it was a new construction. Yeah, and it grew out of an interest. And this is beautiful because at the same time that I was trying to find solutions that would be applicable to people like my daughters, there was a group that had formed at St. Rose of Lima Parish that recognized that being in Montgomery County and being in a parish with a lot of resources, particularly land, that they ought to be able to do something good with it. And to make a long story short, as you know, Rachel, there was an agreement that the best way to go forward would be to donate a piece of the land, to tithe a piece of the land that was part of the parish community for the purpose of inspiring a housing option for people with special needs. And then that partnership or that impetus at the parish level through various contacts led the parish committee to me, and together we found another resource at the Archdiocesan level that introduced us to contacts that people in the Archdiocese had in Montgomery County that put us in touch with the financing to make the project happen. So in that particular instance, we had a tithe of land from St. Rose of Lima Parish, and we had 100% construction financing from the local county. The county was willing to do that to look at this project as a flagship, and also made it clear that they wouldn't do 100% financing going forward, that we'd have to come up with 50% and they'd come up with 50%. Again, that gets into the formula, the varied formula that I said happens with each different house.
Yeah. So, and that kind of speaks to too, Tom, as well, is looking at each individual parish and situation and kind of adapting. That's kind of one of
Exactly. Right.
beautiful traits of Rosaria communities. It can be replicated, as you mentioned, and the partnerships are existing, the relationships, but it can be adapted depending
Yeah.
on the different need or the different situation of the parish.
Correct.
So, how would you see? I kind of mentioned briefly in the webinar. We could see it's a huge need. Like I said, 5,000 people. That's just in the state of Maryland that are still in waiting for services. So, how would you see Rosaria communities to going forward with this need? How would you see them meeting that need?
Yeah. So we tend, it seems like we are most often approached by families who have some services. Again, they haven't gotten to the point yet in their family life where they're unable to care for their special needs family member. But we start the conversation and we work toward a solution. And this, as we just said, the solution tends to be different in every situation. But I go back, Rachel, to the fact that money is the biggest obstacle.
Mm-hmm.
So if they come to us with services, then that really just makes them a candidate to be a resident. What we have to find is, we've been blessed to find families that have a special needs adult, but who also have financial resources, who have been willing to share their good fortune, which not only benefits their son or daughter, but also could benefit two other people who aren't quite as fortunate in the way of resource. So that's typically how our model has come together. So going forward, we've got to find a lot more of those people that are willing to, that people that have resources or other sources. We do fundraising also. Our fundraising is kind of three-pronged. It obviously is, we raise money to provide for the capital needs of maintaining a house, but we also raise money to provide funding to supplement the income of the care providers, because they tend to be on the lower end of the pay scale, just a little bit above minimum wage. So we raise money to create bonus programs to encourage tenure of staff and the quality of care. We award bonuses on an annual basis to supplement that the care provider's income based on tenure and quality of care, peer-reviewed quality of care. But the third thing that we raise money for is to try to assemble enough money to do a house on our own without that family that has the resources that become the staple that helps us to get the rest of the funding together. If Rosaria can raise the money to build a house, and that's what we're in the process of also trying to do that, then we'll do our own without having that family that well-endowed family that I was talking about before.
Right. But I think it speaks to Tom, that it's got to be innovative as possible, right? that there has to be multiple options out there as well. And of course, we know money is the big challenge, but that way people can see there's not just one way to do things, right? One kind of piece in that big mosaic of trying to meet these needs. And you mentioned too, Tom, that the particular people living at Rosaria happen to need supports, right? That's kind of where that Rosaria can meet those needs of people that maybe not be able to rent an apartment, right, or live on their own, but they actually do have a need of support in their home.
Yeah, and I think that our residents tend to be more highly impacted people with developmental difficulties, and they require a higher level of care, and that level of care, and again, and let me also say that our model is geared to taking care of our residents from the time that they come into our Rosaria project until their end of life. We want them to be able to age at home. So just in the short amount of time that we've been doing this, our first house opened in 2008, and here we are in 2019. We have seen one of our age residents with Down syndrome go from being very active and involved to developing Alzheimer's and is now in a hospice situation. So, and all of that is happening within our house. And as those needs, as the needs for care change, and the needs for services change, the house has been adapted to accommodate that. So that's one of the ways that Rosaria is addressing the future needs, in addition to always being on the lookout for resources to develop another home.
Exactly. So looking at that whole lifespan of the person, including the time when it might be, the end of their life, and that's one of the key values, you would say, right, Tom, of Rosaria community.
That's exactly.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. And let me also just make the point in terms of addressing the future needs that once there is a model that's established, even if it's a model with a lot of moving parts like ours is, as the community becomes aware of it, as more and more people become aware of it, the identification of resources becomes more plentiful. It's like networking, right? It gets out into the community that Rosaria exists and essentially how Rosaria's model works. So in the case of our most recent house, there was a wealthy benefactor who had a property that he decided to do something better with the house than sell it and pocket the money. And so he attempted to give it to L'Arche. Well, L'Arche said, well, thank you, but that's the easiest part of our model. What we would probably do with the house is sell it and use the resources to further the L'Arche model in another way. But that wasn't what he had in mind. He wanted the house to be used specifically to house people with special needs. So L'Arche put him in touch with Rosaria. L'Arche was aware of Rosaria, put him in touch with Rosaria, and the house was donated to us. So the point is the networking has a huge value. As the community becomes aware of the Rosaria model, more and more people make inquiries about Rosaria. More and more people hear somebody else who has a need who say, have you heard about Rosaria communities? Go talk to them. So the networking has a serious benefit.
Yeah.
We're at a much better place now than we were in 2008.
Yeah, and that kind of speaks to, again, as well as all of us, meaning Rosaria, L'Arche, and other providers, again, looking innovative ways, not just the same way that it's always been done, but what are the different ways we can meet needs and, again, partner, network, and kind of share that. So, and that is a beautiful home as well, renovated very, very beautifully, that home.
All of our houses are, our attitude is that we want our residents to live in a house that's as nice as a house that we would want to live in. So they're all beautifully maintained and they're lovely houses. Let me also just speak to, since we're talking about the Rosaria model, one of the things that we recognized early on was that we didn't have the scale to provide care. So we did a great job of scouring the local landscape for care providers. And our partnership is with Jubilee Association of Maryland, which is a Mennonite outreach. And the reason that we partnered with Jubilee is not only that all they do is provide care, that's their mission, but they're a ministry that grew out of the Mennonite congregation. And they immediately got our interest in the spiritual needs of our residents. So not only is Rosaria geared that way, but our care provider, Jubilee, is geared that way. And so we have a higher level of confidence that not only the hygienic and nutritional and the housing needs of our residents are being cared for, but the care providers themselves come from a faith-based organization that's helping to assure our mission, in addition to the very important role that the parish plays in oversight and in neighborly involvement with the house.
Yeah, excellent. And that was kind of leading to as well, how have the parishes responded? What would you say the way that interaction kind of really plays out, if you will? How does that connection continue with the different?
Well, it's a very easy thing it's probably the easiest part of our model to gain parish involvement.
Yeah.
We typically will make our initial contact with the pastor. And yeah, I love our pastors. They've got a lot to do, but they recognize that this is a need. They more and more recognize that this is a need within their parish community. And they tend to know who the people are in the parish community who would relate to this type of an involvement. And that's the next contact that we would make. And then having made those contacts, we through announcements in the parish bulletin or whatever, have a meeting to glean the folks from among the parish community who would have an interest in having an involvement with a neighborly involvement with the house that's going to be situated within their parish community. Yeah. And it's very responsive. You think that something like this will work, and when it does, it's just so rewarding that we don't just go to church on Sunday. We actually believe that we're pro-life. We don't just encourage people to continue on with difficult pregnancies, but once they have them, that we're there to take care of them, to help them take care of their the special needs folks that result from being a pro-life community.
That's right. And again, just as you spoke to early, embracing the whole person throughout their life. We have to be committed to that as a church, right?
We do.
And what would you say to Tom to that? We kind of mentioned it briefly, but there are the residents of those homes. It's not required to be Catholic. we should mention as well. Yeah, we're talking the spiritual needs of that person wherever they are.
Right, and it's I think the quote's been attributed to Cardinal Hickey that we don't do it because they're Catholic. We do it because we are.
Yeah, excellent, well said. And I think too, Tom, that as we're talking, I think that spiritual life of a person with intellectual and developmental disabilities is unfortunately often overlooked. They're seen as a one-dimensional person, unfortunately. They're not seen as a whole person that wants to connect with their faith. And we need them in our parishes, right? They give us as well. They give to us by their presence and their participation. So
they do, and so we see them. Rachel, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but we see them involved more and more. There's proactive interest at parish level of involving special needs folks more and more in the different ministries of the parish. And in my oldest daughter, Kyle, was an altar server until about 4 years ago when she was 34. So it's, that was very important to her for her to get her altar serving schedule and to be on the altar and assist with the Mass. So whether it's that or whether it's at St. Rose, you mentioned St. Rose before, the parish is very good about making sure that the residents of St. Rose House, when there's a parish gathering of some sort, whether it's a bazaar or some other sort of a gathering, that they recruit the guys to help set it up, set up the tables and chairs and help do the cleanup. And as I said, when it comes to going to Mass, have somebody that the parish recognizes them and greets them when they arrive. They're embraced by the parish community in so many different ways.
Yeah, excellent. So again, and that's the important part too, again, a value of Rosaria communities, that connection with the parish is not just on a superficial level, right, Tom? It goes deeper to that, to embrace the people that live there.
Exactly. And it's consistent with other types of outreaches, Rachel, that I know you're aware of, like Catholic Coalition for Special Education, which is helping to assure that special needs children are able to be educated in our parish schools to the extent that that's a possibility, but that they're welcomed, and that whether or not they're a candidate is discerned, but the welcoming is the important part.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So we kind of touched on it briefly, Tom, and you mentioned about contacting a pastor in kind of that initial phase, but what advice would you have to parishes that are interested in exploring this type of model? What kind of advice would you give them on the parish level?
Well, if we're talking locally, if we're talking about the Archdiocese of Washington,
Yes.
I think what I would like to see, well, I mentioned networking before.
Mhm, mhm.
It would behoove Rosaria and our mission for more and more pastors to be aware of us. So we talk with as many of them as we can, but nothing could happen better than for their own parishioners to make an inquiry and to inform their pastor about Rosaria and to encourage them to meet with me. I would love to do that. And then once we meet with the pastor, we can figure out whether the particular parish is a candidate for donating land that can be an asset that can go into the formula for doing a new house, or whether they're aware. There may have been an approach to a pastor by a parishioner who's one of those parishioners with resources that we talked about before, but the pastor didn't know where to send them. So I would encourage anybody that's on this webinar to tell to themselves and to tell all their friends, talk to your pastor about Rosaria, encourage them to meet with us so they can be aware of us, so that when one of their parishioners comes to them with a situation that we might be able to help with, that they're aware of us.
Okay, yeah, excellent. And we saw from again Saint Rose of Lima that conversation took time to build, but the fruits were seen, right, Tom? But it was a conversation and a journey for that parish, as I think the other parishes as well. It wasn't just a
It was
one conversation.
No, it was an 8-year journey.
Yes, thank you. Yeah.
It was an 8-year journey, but the journey is getting shorter with each incremental project. The second one took 4 more years, then the one after that was only 3, and the one after that was only 2.
Yeah.
The time frame is shrinking. As a practical matter, there's always going to be probably a couple of years. It takes that long to assemble the financing and to get all the documents together and all that sort of stuff.
Right. So not we're still encouraging people, right, Tom? But it is a journey. We do want to mention that, and that's part of
It is
that.
a journey.
Yeah, and again, that helps to build the parish too with this journey, that they can get involved and be active right from the beginning and at every level. So I know that's been key.
Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep. And most often there's been a formal ministry involved just for this.
Exactly. Yes. Yes. And again, it's looking at the whole lifespan of the person. I know we mentioned that a few times, but we can have that religious education that's adapted, and support,
Yep.
schooling. But it's also, again, at some point, a family might probably won't be able to care for the person, right? As the parents age, there has to be that next step, and that can be looking at, again, the whole lifespan of the person.
Right, and it's also important to mention in this, one of the other beauties of this model, Rachel, is that when the parents of the special needs person die, that's one of the transitions that person has to deal with. And when care providers change, that's one of the transitions that our residents have to deal with. They get close to the care providers. They're obviously close to their family. But one continuity that they have is that parish community. So, and that's a really important aspect of what we bring to the table. Because we've been doing this now for over 10 years, where we've had residents for over 10 years, we've seen our residents lose their parents. We've seen the change in care providers, but we've also seen the benefit of the continuity of our residents recognizing the individuals in their parish community, so that there's a continuity in their life. it's not all disruption.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of also that in some cases the continuity of their faith, right? If they are
Yes.
Catholic, it's again having that feel, that connection to a church community, that
Yeah,
relationship
familiar
building.
faces, right?
Yeah,
Right,
exactly.
familiar faces.
And also building relationships outside of paid people. We know the Jubilee staff have been a very genuinely caring people, but you're right, they move in and out sometimes, right? And but when you develop the relationships of the person outside of paid people in their life, it speaks to exactly what you're saying. That can help them through those big life changes because they're real
Yep,
relationships.
exactly.
Well, thank you so much, Tom. We are going to open our webinar to some questions. So we'll give you a few moments, everyone, and you should see to the right hand of your screen a chat box or question box. So we'd like to open that up to people to please comment with your thoughts or any feedback, right, Tom? We welcome that as well.
Please.
Or any thoughts you have. So while people are preparing their thoughts and questions, we'll just share a few resources. As people are typing in their questions, feel free to continue with that. So as we mentioned, how can we respond today? We heard that the journey is one that takes time, but how can we respond today as a church as well? We can embrace families supporting a loved one living with disabilities. So we know these families in our church communities, so we can reach out to them and make sure they feel that sense of belonging. And just as Tom mentioned his daughter being an altar server, we need to encourage that full participation of people, that they are also giving back to our church community as well. And sometimes adults that we've known, adults living with intellectual and developmental disabilities, may have moved away from their family home, but we as church can stay connected with them. We can invite them to come back to the parish, so that way they have, again, that connection of their parish life that they've always known. If you own a business or work in a management type of position, consider hiring an adult person living with disabilities. I think that's also something we can do as Catholics that are business owners and those people that are able to hire. Consider hiring a person living with disabilities. And also, I know, Tom, we welcome again people to reach out to a Rosaria home through their parish ministry and to be part of that community, whether it's bringing someone to Mass or bringing a meal to a home. I know the parishes have responded in a wide variety of ways. So that's also something we can do today to reach out. Okay, so we will see if we have some questions here. Okay, all right. We're just seeing if there's any questions, Tom. Oh, get rid of that.
Yep.
All right, let me just check here. Okay. Okay. Oh, here's a question, Tom. Will Prince George's County, this is a question from one of our webinar participants, will Prince George's County be a possibility for a Rosaria home? Because currently all the Rosaria homes are in Montgomery County, right, Tom? That's correct.
That is correct, and that speaks to the importance of having established connections with people in the agencies, the local agencies. Again, I referred to it as greasing the skids, and all I meant by that was that we have relationships with individuals within the different housing agencies so that they know what you do. You don't have to start telling the story anew each time, and it just moves everything along faster. We don't have those kind of relationships established in Prince George's County, but our commitment is to Rosaria's commitment is not just to Montgomery County, it's to the Archdiocese of Washington. So we would kind of be back to square one maybe a subset of Rosaria, to do a house in Prince George's County, because we don't have those political connections, but we have to make them at some point, and we intend to.
Okay, excellent. And I know that our Archdiocese of Washington is a very actually quite a large archdiocese as well. Calvert, Charles, St.
Yep.
Mary's, and we haven't mentioned Washington D.C., but that's a different system. But that's
Right.
part of our archdiocese, as well as Prince George's. And I think speaking to any of our parishioners too, that's also that continuing advocacy piece at the county level, right, Tom? That's something
Right.
parishioners can do as well, is to reach out to their representatives and remind them of this need. And that's
Reach out to the representatives, and I would encourage anybody who's interested to talk to their pastor, and to find out who, maybe the pastor has political connections in Prince George's County, or knows of a parishioner who does. So it's just a matter of networking and finding and identifying what that network is, to bring these things to fruition. Montgomery County gets most of its money from federal programs that work their way through the state and to the local agencies. So Prince George's County would have a similar mechanism, just a different mechanism because it's a different county. And we just haven't identified it yet. But as I said, at some point we have to. And it can all start with a conversation with your pastor and encourage them to talk to me.
Yeah, excellent, excellent. And I think it also speaks to too is about I know I mentioned it before, but again that advocacy piece for us as well. Speaking to our representatives and making sure they know that this need is here, and continuing that. I would probably at the state level too, right, Tom? But many things happen at the county level, especially in regards to housing resources. But you're right. Who are the right players, and who are the ones that are going to help to move those resources along to that direction?
Right. Yeah, there are all sorts of funding mechanisms, and some of them are matching funds, so that Montgomery County's been able to attract a lot of state financing because they have programs, and Montgomery County is a wealthy county, has its own resources that it can use to match the funds that come from the state via the federal government. So it's pretty complicated, but it's there. Just have to identify where it is and how it's being done county by county.
Yeah, exactly. Or even if in our parishes too, thinking innovatively and creatively about maybe we were mentioning a person that donated a home too in one of the Rosaria homes. Maybe there's empty buildings on parish property, right? Just thinking, as we're
exactly
right. It doesn't have to be just one part. Again, that's the beauty of the
exactly
story. Yeah.
That's right, and we don't have to depend on local financing, local governmental financing. If we can raise the money ourselves somehow, then we can do that. But you're right, Rachel. We've been in discussions with different parishes who have vacant convents on their property, and who have acquired land for parking or whatever that has a house on it that they don't know what to do with. Those sorts of things are out there.
Yeah, exactly. And again, part of that whole mosaic to respond to this great need, right? Tom, we wish Rosaria communities could respond to every need, which I'm sure it could with unlimited financing, but we have to think in a whole mosaic, right? And think again, innovation and creative.
Right.
Exactly. And again, I know we talked briefly, but how would you say that role of Jubilee? Because Jubilee does not own the homes. I think we mentioned that in our webinar, but we should emphasize that, right? That they want to also, as a provider of those services, not be in the home owning business, if you will.
Yeah, they're not allowed to anymore. The financing has gone from finding what we used to call group homes. An entity like a Jubilee would go to the state for financing, or for financing for a group home. And the group home was licensed, and they would put residents in the home who had that need. but it wasn't an effective model. So the way that the state and at the direction of the federal government is moving is to send the financing, the revenue source, the money goes to the resident, and the resident decides where they want to live and who's going to provide the services. And so they're in control. And if they're in a house they don't like, they can go move, take their funding somewhere else. So it encourages each entity to do a better job to make their residents happy.
Yeah, and again, and this is just it's really where services, we can't just say moving, have moved. You know, that
Right.
it's moving toward that separation of provider agencies owning properties, and that gives choice to the person that
Right.
they're part of that choice and where they live, which is key.
Right.
Very key.
Right. So Jubilee's role, as an example, is to do the paperwork on behalf of that individual, to help them to assemble their funding, and to provide the services once the funding has been realized. So and that's generally providing care in homes and assistance in the community.
Yeah, excellent. So I think we have one more question here, and I guess this kind of speaks to that networking and partnering. Would other providers work too if you were in a different county? Or I don't know if you want to speak to that today. If you were to move into a different county, it would always be working with a provider agency.
Yeah, the possibility exists, of course, yes. But we would be very judicious before we partnered with an entity to make sure that they supported all the points of what marks a Rosaria home. They particularly have to be on board with addressing the spiritual needs of the resident. And in Jubilee's case, they have just started to provide care in the first home outside of Montgomery County, in a home in Prince George's County in College Park, or Hyattsville, I guess it is.
Yeah.
So that's their first foray. There's also, we're aware of a very good organization in Frederick. We just don't have a Rosaria home in Frederick yet, and it's outside of the Archdiocese of Washington. But there are good care providers other than Jubilee, for sure.
Okay,
You just have to figure out who they are.
And I think, again, it's just speaking to is family advocates too, making sure any provider really values that spiritual importance of the person, looking at them as a whole person, right, Tom? Not just someone who needs meals and medical appointments, but again, that needs that connection to their faith.
Right.
The Rosaria homes, again, are not only Catholics living there. So again, but their faith is enhanced and faith is encouraged, right?
Exactly. It's part of the whole person.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, I see we don't have any more questions, but feel free if anyone here has some more questions. But we'd like to share a few resources, and I have as well a page of Rosaria Community's website, which again is a wonderful way to view all the homes, as listed on our resources page, which is a handout on this webinar, along with some other resources that people might want to explore, including the community of practice, which kind of is looking towards, again, Maryland is moving to this movement of services where it's not just provided services, but we're all working together to help the person have not just a good life, but a great life.
Right.
And, actually, we were mentioning Prince George's County. We will be having for Prince George's County residents, but everyone is welcome to come and hear. We'll be having a session on exploring housing options for Prince George's County, because many of these resources are county level as well. So we'll be having a session with our Brunch Bunch, which is a partnership with the Department of Special Needs and the ARC Prince George's County, and Prince George's Community Resources. So that will be on September 26th at a Holy Family Church in Mitchellville, Prince George's County. And our next Lunch and Learn in October, we will look towards exploring how we can reach families from our Spanish-speaking households. And that will be our next webinar. Our guest will be Lilia Leon Arnez, who is the Executive Director of our Hispanic Community Resources. So in our next webinar in October, October 10th, we'll be looking specifically on how to make sure all families of our parishes, especially those from Spanish-speaking households, are included in our disability ministries. So please join our webinar. It will be bilingual, English and Spanish. And of course, all are welcome to our 10th annual, if you can believe it, 10th annual White Mass. This is a big year, which will be held on Sunday, October 27th at 11:30 a.m., again at the Cathedral of St. Matthew the Apostle. And this 10th annual White Mass, we will welcome our new Archbishop. Archbishop Wilton Gregory will be our celebrant. So we are very blessed to have him be our celebrant for this year's White Mass. So all are welcome to attend this Mass to celebrate the gifts of persons who are deaf and persons living with disabilities. And it is a beautiful Mass, right, Tom? I know you've been before too. So
many of them. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So please come and we can welcome Archbishop Gregory to our wonderful ministries here at the Archdiocese of Washington. And again, thank you, Tom, again, for all your work with Rosaria communities. We are just most grateful for all the insights and advocacy you have done through these many years. Also over 10 years since the first home opened up and we've seen it grown. So thank you so much. And thank you for showing us one way that the Catholic Church, along with other community partners, can provide not just a house, but a home, a true home for adults living with disabilities. So thank you again, Tom, and we appreciate all that you've done for persons living with disabilities in our Archdiocese of Washington.
Well, thank you, Rachel. It's been a pleasure to join, and my efforts would be zero if they weren't complemented by so many other people and the Holy Spirit.
Yes. So we know it's good work when we see the fruits. So
Exactly.
You're right, Tom. You're right. So, and please again visit the Rosaria Communities website so you can see the different homes throughout our Archdiocese, and definitely we want all of our parishioners to connect with those homes and make sure they welcome the residents there into their parish life. So thank you again, Tom, for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, everyone. And we will see you in October for our next webinar. Thank you.